Okay, let's get started. Welcome all. I have the envious time slot of being right before lunch, so we'll see how this goes. My name is Brian Hoops. I'm the CISO at Deseret Digital Media. One of the reasons I'm here is, who is Deseret Digital Media? If you're from Utah, you may or may not have heard of us. By show of hands, who's heard of Deseret Digital Media? I'm curious. There are a few, okay. I bet if you're from Utah, you've heard of KSL.com, I hope. And we also own and operate a company called Utah.com. So if you're not from Utah, come visit us at Utah.com and find some fun adventures of things to do. But we are, as a whole, Deseret Digital Media, KSL TV and radio are sister companies, but we run KSL.com. Okay, who am I? As I said, my name is Brian Hoops. I've been working in the developer field for 20 plus years. I started out at the Salt Lake School District, so it's great for all of the UEN folks that got me through college. When I finished college, I went and worked at KSL as a developer and have been there ever since. So many years there, most of the time as a developer or manager. I've been CISO for a little more than a year at DDM. So that's who I am. What this talk is, so what we are going to talk a little bit about is some of the lessons I've learned along the way, not necessarily technical lessons, but things that have changed my perspective as we've gone, or as I've gone through the path. What this talk is not. This is not a blueprint of how to become a CISO. I fully believe that that path is going to be pretty individual. And that's something that you'll need to find your own path, and mine is fairly unique along the way. But what I will say is get involved in security, be it incidents, be it just saying, hey, have you thought about this security-wise? Are you sure you want to put that into production? Those kinds of things. But that's about all I'm going to say on the technical side. So the preface here, it's about people. If you want to become a CISO, you can be as technical as you want, but if you can't get along with people, it's not going to work. You can try it, but it's not going to work very well. So let's start out with a couple of points of things I've learned along the way. And we're going to look at these from a developer point of view, a manager point of view, and the CISO point of view. So my Scrum roots are going to come out, and I'm going to use the word clout. A very scrummy term, but as a developer, you need to create relationships with your team and get their trust. As a manager, you need the trust of your team and sometimes the teams you work with. And sometimes you'll work in between teams, but really it's getting the trust of your team and those above you and those around you. As a very young manager, my boss pulled me aside and he said, Hoops, you're grumpy. You got to be nicer to the other teams. This isn't working. And I will say that was one of the low points of my jobs. What did I do? I went away and I reflected on it. And I came back to my boss and I was like, what are you talking about? I'm just trying to get things done. I have my heads down. If I tell people no, it's because, well, no. And I'm just trying to get through my very long to-do list. At this point, I was managing the KSL Classifieds team. We had 4 or 5 engineers, and we had a lot to do. And he came back to me and he said, Hoops, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go chit-chat with the product owners for 5 minutes a day. That's all I want. Just go talk to them. And I was like, I got other things to do. He's like, Oops, do it. So away I went, and I would go over to their cubicles and chit-chat with them and kind of make small talk. And amazingly, those concerns went away. I have no idea who went to my boss and told him I was grumpy, but I will tell you that the chit-chat and the small people things will gain you that clout to be able to get you to a point that people trust you and will listen to you. As a CISO, you're expected to manage the risk for the company, and all have to trust what you're going to say, but so you have to have the clout within the company, and you have to build it and make it work. Okay. Oops, too far. Words and tone. This kind of builds on the clout. When you're talking to your individual team, They understand you. You talk to them a lot every day. And if you say the wrong thing, it's not usually a big deal, and they just kind of get over it, or they'll say, hey man, that's not cool. As a manager, the things you say are typically to people you work with. They're not always going to give you feedback, and you communicate enough with them that hopefully if you say something wrong, that's not going to become a huge problem. As a CISO, when you speak, people typically listen. If you say the wrong thing or push too hard, then they're going to get offended, and you're probably not going to hear about it directly from them. That's probably going to come back through the grapevine, and somebody's just going to say, hey, you said this to them. How could you do that? And you have no idea, and you think, oh my goodness, what did I do? And then you have to try and repair that. So even the wrong tone can sometimes get you in the wrong spot. I will say, over the years, I've learned that I reflect on conversations, especially difficult conversations. I'll reflect on them, and I'll think about them, and I'll think, gee, maybe that didn't go right. Maybe they didn't get the right message. Maybe I pushed too hard. And so I'll actually circle back around with them. Some of my teams here, they've probably gotten this from me before. And I'll go back to them and say, hey, I didn't mean to offend you. I was just trying to express a point. Are we good? And usually they'll say, no, we're good. And that kind of fixes some of those words and tone issues. And often, especially, when I'm just thinking out loud, I'll preface my thoughts with, hey, I'm thinking here. Don't take this as what I want or what I'm telling you to do. Let's just talk about this. And that kind of lowers the barriers a little bit from me coming in and saying, hey guys, this is what we need to do. And as we've gone remote, DDM is nearly fully remote at this point. We call it hybrid. But we don't see each other face-to-face quite as much, but that's changed this dynamic a lot. We talk through chat, we talk through email, we talk through Zoom, and sometimes if you're not assuming the right intention, you can come away with the really wrong message. And so you have to be very careful about that. You have to really reflect on those conversations, and when you need to go back and fix something, do it and do it quickly. Because if people can fester on things, it's not going to be a great situation. Okay, let's talk about wearing the company hat. And that's kind of a strange thing, but it will make sense, I promise. Get to the right notes here. So, as a developer, you see things from the point of view of the task you're working on, right? So, as a developer, I was just heads down trying to get through things. We needed to release things. We had tons to do, so I was just pushing forward. And I saw things, and I would push back on things from the point of view of the task at hand or the product or feature we were trying to work on. As a manager, you see things from the point of view that affects your team and what's important to them, right? So you try and get rid of roadblocks. You try and push back on the things that you know aren't going to work so well. And you take things from the point of view of the products and the features that you're working on. And you also have to try and help your team understand how those things fit into the company vision. And hopefully you're getting that from those above you. As a CISO, you must see things from the point of view of the entire company. Sometimes you have to find the balance between competing views. I will always remember a few years ago talking to the president of the company at the time and saying, hey, from a technical point of view, this is really not a good place to be. And him saying, from this other point of view, this is where we need to be, so where's the balance? And I said, yes, but I'm thinking about this from a technical point of view. And he said, Hoops, wear the company hat. You have to look at this from a company point of view. We have to find the balance. Right now, we're working through some things where, from a security standpoint, we see things one way, and another team sees things another way. I was just talking to my boss about this, and he didn't come in and say, this is how it is. He said, go work with them, figure it out. So that's where it comes in. You have to wear the company hat, and you have to change your point of view of what's best for the company rather than what's best and hard set for this particular thing. Security has hard set rules, but often it comes down to finding that balance and figuring out how to figure out the best way to make it work and the balance between things. Okay, Can you say I don't know to questions? And this is kind of a strange thing. It's another interesting point of view change as you go. As a developer, you are the expert, right? You wrote the code, you know what's going on, you know how it interacts, hopefully, with other things. And years later, you're still getting blamed for that code you wrote, so you know how it goes. I was actually talking to a guy I worked with at the school district today. He's like, hey, we finally retired that thing. And I was like, that's 20 years ago. That shouldn't have been still alive. As a manager, you ensure that your team knows the details and you understand the basic concepts, but you're probably not going to be in the code anymore. I spent a lot of time in code, and that caused some problems because I was trying to be heads down yet manage a team, and as my team got larger, that was nearly impossible. But you can't know all of what your teams are working on. So I remember a time that I was talking to my dotted line boss, our VP of product, and he's like, hey, Hoops, how does this work? And I was like, and I just kind of sat there for a minute. And he's like, well, I was like, I don't know. And it really bugs me that I don't know, but I don't know. I need to go talk to somebody. He's like, Hoops, you can't know everything. Go find out and come back and tell me. But it was one of those things that I had shifted from a developer to a manager, and then I didn't know everything. And that really bugged me because I knew how everything worked. At one point, I knew how KSL.com worked head to toe. I could tell you everything. These days, not so much. So you can't know all of what your teams are working on. As a CISO, there's no chance you're going to know what things are working on. You have to come at it from a point of view of asking the right questions at the right time. I spent a lot of time in product reviews and just kind of observing what's going on, and every once in a while in those product reviews, I'll say, hey, have you thought about this? Or I'll circle back around with them post meeting and say, hey, we should look at this. Can you give me some time to go into that, and we'll go back. But you can only know the global concepts. You can only know the big things of what your team's working on, but you also know who to go talk to if there's an issue. Heaven forbid there's an incident with a product, you really need to go and talk to those people, and you gotta know who it is, and you gotta have that clout so they'll listen to you. Okay. Doing well. So, this happened to me about a year ago. You're a new CISO. Now what? My boss referred to me as a security blanket for a short time. He's like, hey, Hoops, you're the security blanket for DDM. I'm so happy to have you here. And I was like, oh, great. Just what I need. So, the first thing you need to do is get to know the other leaders. I'm on the senior leadership team. You have to get to know those other leaders really well, because those are the people you're going to clash with. And the president of the company or CEO or whoever your boss is probably isn't going to come in and say, this is the way. He'll say, go figure it out with those people. So you got to get to know them. You got to make those bonds. I will also say, as a CISO, life's lonely at the top. You don't get a whole lot of positive feedback. Nobody's high-fiving you, hey, we haven't had an incident today. The only time you get hear from people is, hey, you really screwed this up, or hey, what's up with this incident? And so though the people you can really talk to and open up with are those on that leadership team and those your direct peers. So get to know those people. And I will very much say clout matters here too. If those folks think that you're not the smartest tool in the shed, then you got a lot of problems and you got to figure that out. Do you understand your company's risk appetite? So KSL.com has ownership, right? And we are somewhat risk averse. So we do things a little differently than some other companies do because we avoid that risk as best we can. And there are often times, as I said, I'll be sitting in product reviews and I'll chime in and say, hey, the liability on that's kind of interesting. It's probably not horrible, but we need to think about that. And it's understanding that company's risk appetite, and it will be different for every company. And if your company doesn't know what that is, you need to figure it out with the other senior leaders to know what's going on and know how to get past that. Do security policies exist, right? For a long time when we were a relatively small shop, and yes, KSL.com, when I started there were 2 developers handling all of KSL. We're a little bit larger now, but we had policies that weren't exactly written. They were just known, right? You talked about it. You talk, hey boss, this is what I'm doing, and they'd say, oh, that's not great. You need to look at it from this way. So are your security policies written down? The other question is, does anybody know that they exist and where they are? I know I will often tell folks at DDM my favorite thing to do is write policies. I kind of avoid it, but it's something that's very necessary and needed. The next thing to do is turn on the lights. If you haven't had a formal security process or you don't know what's going on within your company, you got to turn on the lights and take a peek. You're going to find things that aren't so super, but you need to know that they're there so you can then mitigate them. And you got to work with the folks, and that's where that clout comes in, so they'll actually tell you that those things are out there. And we have enough fun times when you're like, oh, I didn't know that website was there. Where did that come from? And that was just, they didn't remember it, or they didn't remember to tell you. But if they're hiding things from you, you're never going to find them. So having that clout to turn on the lights and know what's crawling around is very important. The last big point is you can't do everything at once, right? So you can come in and you're like, oh, we need to implement NIST framework, we need to do red teaming, we need to do pen testing, we need to do code reviews, we've got to get all of the engineers trained, we've got to get the rest of the company phishing trained, we've got to do all this stuff, right? If you come at it from that point of view, it's not going to be a fun time. You got to start somewhere, you got to figure out where that risk appetite is and start working towards things. I will say that we've had a lot of fun doing pen testing on some of our products, and then we noticed some patterns. And this last week, we did an internal CTF with our teams, and had a lot of fun with them. And not only did we get to build some fun challenges, but they also got to learn some of the things. And seeing how they reacted to those challenges also tells us where we need to go from there. So start interacting with those teams, figure out what's going on, and know how to help them. And if you try something and it doesn't work, well, try something else. We learned a lot of lessons from our CTF. We'll probably do it again next year and change things up to make it a little better for folks. So it's always an iterative process, if I can say that word. Awesome. Any questions? Y'all are quiet. Sure. Uh-huh.
If you're not getting things like that from management, what can the people underneath do to help support you do those?
I think it's just getting involved and voicing the things. Maybe I think I understand your question. If I don't, tell me and we'll figure it out. So I will say from the beginning, I was kind of known as a security guy. Right? When we'd have minor incidents, there were a few of us that would come in, gather around, chase it down, figure it out. We didn't really have a formal security process. And from that point, people kind of knew you, and they'd come talk to you, and you'd voice those things. One word of caution there is you can't be the only security person. Like, you can't only talk about security, because then you become that guy, right? That squeaky wheel. And it's something, to be honest, I try to avoid in my role, right? That is my job, that is my role. I do think a lot about security, but if I walk up to somebody and they think immediately, oh, Hoops is going to talk to me about security, it's not so super. But I will say, get involved. Really what ended me up in this position was we had a minor incident, and I went to my boss and I said, hey, we're big enough, we need somebody looking at security. I don't know what the title is, I don't know how it fits in, I don't even know if it's me, but we need this. And for a few years, it kind of went through the circles, and then finally, we were getting a new CTO. I was very involved in that process. I didn't get the CTO role, but I was offered the role of CISO at the time. So that's kind of how that came out. So if you make yourself known, and it really depends on the company you're at, but I've been at DDM or KSL for a long time, and they kind of knew me as a security person. So when that role became a thing, they put me in it. Does that answer your question? Yep. Any other questions? Drew?
What are some of the strategies you use to talk tech with non-tech people?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I use a lot of examples, non-tech examples, just try to get people to see that point of view. As you said, it's a lot of fun, and sometimes it's boiling it down to the smallest thing and kind of building up from there. Years ago, our then president of the company talked about what's known as the ladder of inference, which this is getting into really random business principles. But the idea is if you're both on a ladder, you're above or below each other, and you can't communicate above or below each other. So you have to go to the very bottom, and then you can build up from there together. So that's kind of the process that we use. Any other questions? Sure.
How do you measure your security posture?
Uh,
Work on that. How do you know if you're doing it well? How do you do that?
That's a great question. I will say for us, we work a lot with our customer service team. So we do not only security, but fraud, which opens that up all the more, and fraud prevention. So we work a lot with our customer experience folks. They're the front lines on the fraud, so we actually measure a lot of stuff from them. As we mature, and we're really young in the security process, we're looking at the frameworks, right? So right now we're going through the CIS framework just to see where we are and how that goes. We're doing that with our parent company and looking at the others. But I will admit, we're pretty young in that, and we need to grow. And the other part of that is you got to be honest with yourself sometimes, right? So I think right about now my boss is in the board meeting, and he's told me every board meeting he wants a slide on fraud and security. So I provide him with that, giving him some information, and we'll see if they ever come back wanting more. But up until now, they're pretty happy with the progress we've made. We're not perfect, but we're making progress. Sure. Yep. To my knowledge, nobody's hiding anything from us. But I can tell you, as recently as a month ago, we were in a conversation and somebody mentioned renewing a site, and that caught my ear. And a lot of things catch my ear, and I circled back around. I was like, what site is that? And they're like, oh, it's this random website that we use on utah.com. And I was like, oh, I had no idea that was there. We should look more into that. But I don't think anybody's hiding anything from us, I hope. We'll find it, maybe. Yes? Yep. Yep. Yeah, so we started doing a lot of that with our internal pen tests, just documenting what's out there, vhosts on the sites, what IPs are where. We work a lot with our platform team, our IT guys, and the web guys as we go through. But it's definitely a constantly evolving thing. I was on a review yesterday. Hey, we put up this website so we could check these things. And I was like, oh, well, yet another one to add to the list, right? So it's definitely a constantly evolving thing. I think as we mature, we'll probably start automating what vhosts are out there and looking at it from that way. And as we move to the cloud, maybe that will become easier. We'll see. Sure.
How would you build or rebuild a relationship with had issues with in the past that you kind of want to
Yeah.
because you want to move up in
Yep.
positions?
Yep. So grumpy hoops, right? I still joke about that. And it takes time, right? But I think something we do at DDM is we recognize that people are people. They're not just coworkers, right? So we spend some time outside of the company, and coming out of the last couple of years, it's been more difficult, but we're starting to do more company events. I will tell you, I am very introverted. I will happily sit next to somebody and not say a word to them forever. Now, that doesn't really mesh with the clout and repairing relationship things. So if you know a little bit about somebody, you can kind of build on that and try to see eye to eye. I've burned more bridges than I'd like to admit, but we've kind of come past it, and it takes time. But chit chat is an amazing thing, and really we do what we call get to know yous. So if you pay attention to those, it tells about people's lives, what they like. Favorite thing to ask is, what's your favorite food? But those kind of things really do build that relationship again. Yeah. That goes back to we recognize people are people and not just coworkers, right? There are a few from my team here, and they'll tell you that if they work late, I'll tell them take a couple hours off, right? So we need to be sharp in case there is an incident, and I will ask them to work 24/7 until we get through it, and I think they understand that. But if we are working a little late on something, then we'll take some time and get away. And we also try to do monthly lunches just to get away, and we maybe talk about work, usually not. But those are the points to rebuild those bridges, make sure you have those relationships, but it also gets rid of some of that burnout, and encourage to take vacation. I've had a crazy October. I'm going to take a vacation in November, and I tell my team to do the same. Any other questions? I will say one of my amazing guys, Chris Ward, made mini badges. So if you find the right guys, you can obviously find me. I have some of them if you're interested. We have DDM mini badges, but the others will as well. So if there aren't any other questions, thank you so much, and happy journeys along your trails.